strikes hit a small town in eastern Ukraine, damaging homes, a school and medical clinic. Ukraine blamed the attack 2 nights ago on pro-Russian separatists, civilians caught in the middle of the 3-year-long conflict. The US has strongly opposed what it calls Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine, blaming Russia for violence that has claimed more than 10,000 lives and displaced 1.7 million people. Now it will provide weapons to help Ukraine defend itself. The State Department announcing the United States has decided to provide Ukraine enhanced defensive capabilities as part of our effort to help Ukraine build its long-term defence capacity to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity and to deter further aggression. Reports suggest the support package, if approved by Congress, would include anti-tank missiles. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said Russia's occupation of Crimea, which the US wants returned to Ukraine, is a major stumbling block in relations between Moscow and Washington.
The issue that stands in the way is Ukraine. We can have differences in other arenas, in Syria. We can have differences in other areas, but when one country invades another, that is a difference that is hard to look past. Or to reconcile. And we've made this clear to Russia from the very beginning that we must address Ukraine. It stands as the single most difficult obstacle to us renormalizing a relationship with Russia, which we badly would like to do.
He blamed Russia for continuing violence in the Donetsk region.
Today we focus on East Ukraine because that's where the level of violence is simply, it's risen. This year, as I indicated, it's up 60%. We have to bring that to an end.
And this US defence package appears to be their answer. But one military analyst suggested it will do little to help Ukraine and is a tactic by Trump to show he's not in bed with the Russians.
The truth is that this is not a game changer on the ground in Ukraine. What's been promised now really are just sniper rifles. This is not going to change things on the ground, and Moscow knows that. This is not striking fear in the heart of anybody in the defense ministry in Moscow.
The move won't help Washington-Moscow relations, especially one day after EU leaders agreed to extend tough economic sanctions against Moscow for another 6 months, punishment for their involvement in Ukraine. Charlotte Ballas, Al Jazeera.
More than a dozen nations are taking part in the Ukraine-US-hosted exercise, Seabreeze 16, to enhance security and interoperability in the Black Sea region.
The main objective of Seabreeze 2016 is to bring the Black Sea partners together on a platform where they can practice and exercise operations together to help improve their interoperability and ultimately improve maritime security operations in the Black Sea region.
Seabreeze combines air, land, maritime, and amphibious forces working together in a number of mission areas.
Moldavian forces will be trained in conduct of this kind of actions and will really increase our capabilities and readiness.
The exercise is divided into a unit-level phase, followed by scenario-driven operations, testing interoperability of forces across many warfare areas.
From this exercise, I want to understand and also to develop my knowledge how exercises are planned, conducted, and assessed.
From Odessa, Ukraine, I'm Petty Officer Kelby Sanders.
Military reinforcements are being ramped up in Crimea, despite last month's extension of economic sanctions on Moscow. Local media report Russia has deployed a new division of S-400 surface-to-air missiles on the peninsula, which it controversially annexed from Ukraine in 2014. This S-400 missile launcher allows us to locate targets in the range of up to 600 kilometers. So even when missiles reach the borders of Crimea, we'll clearly see them. The RIA news agency reports the missiles will control the airspace over the border with Ukraine. Russia claims their aim is to defend and protect the region. We've recently seen more frequent threats to our territory, including an attempted drone attack on our base in Tartus in Syria. So today's deployment of S-400 missile systems covers all the airspace over Crimea, and it makes it impossible for drones, planes or any other flying machines here. Interfax news agency reports the new system, known as Triumph, can be turned into combat mode in less than 5 minutes. The deployment is likely to escalate tensions in the region. In December, the US promised to provide Ukraine with enhanced defensive capabilities, said to include Javelin anti-tank missiles.
For more on what the U.S. hopes to achieve with this move regarding Ukraine, let's bring in Daniel Hoffman, retired CIA station chief who served 5 years in Moscow and is currently vice president of the Sonoran Policy Group. But thanks for joining us on this holiday weekend. I know it's busy out there. First, how significant of a switch is this as far as our policy in Ukraine and providing this weaponry, this defense weaponry?
Well, let me just start by making 2 points by way of background. First, this shouldn't come as much of a surprise to the Russians. The Trump administration has been talking about providing lethal aid to the Ukrainians going back to July of this year. And viewers may recall President Trump's speech in Poland in which he called on Russia to cease its destabilizing activities in Ukraine. Secondly, these Javelin anti-tank weapons are indeed very important. The Russians are sending T-72 tanks to the separatists they back in the Donbass region, and these Javelin weapons will definitely help the Ukrainians push back and assert attempt at least more effectively to assert some territorial integrity in that region.
You know, after Moscow's annexation of Crimea in 2014, this has been a deadly conflict. A lot of folks have referred to it as a low-grade war, but 10,000 people have been killed. And you know, you spent time there in Moscow, so you're aware that Russia has a very active propaganda machine. And in this instance, they've said essentially that by the U.S. taking this action, it will only push the Ukrainian forces towards war. What would your response be to essentially that allegation coming from the Russian side of things?
Yeah, it's typical of the Russians to try to twist things like that. Look, it's the Russians who've been the ones mounting aggressive military campaigns against the Ukrainians, and it really goes back to April of 2008 when NATO announced its plans to issue a membership action plan to Ukraine, and that really caused the Russians great concern. And then, of course, the Russians were supporting separatists in the Donbass region and annexed Crimea. There will be significant bloodshed in Ukraine. The hostilities have increased over the last couple of weeks. But it's Russia who is at fault. They're trying to impose a modern-day version of the Brezhnev Doctrine, where they really limit the sovereignty of the nations in the former Soviet Union.
And Kyiv has made very clear that they believe it's Russia that has provided the troops and the tanks, of course, that they need this anti-tank missiles for. A senior Russian diplomat makes the argument that arming the Ukraine, the United States, quote, raises the danger of derailing the process of peaceful settlement in Ukraine. I mean, where were we on the peaceful settlement process? Was that going anywhere?
Yeah, not really going anywhere. It's pretty well stalled, and one might make the argument that by providing these anti-tank weapons, we're showing that the Russians, we have some skin in the game, that we're supporting a democratically elected government in Ukraine, and that if there may be any hope for some sort of a peace settlement, maybe this will help drive it. But ultimately, I think the Russian endgame for Ukraine really is to support this separatist movement, perhaps even integrate them in some fashion into Ukraine as a fifth column, to ensure that Ukraine never joins NATO, never joins the European Union. That's really an existential threat to Vladimir Putin's regime security.
You know, speaking of the Russians, this is unlikely to warm any of our relations with Russia. And as you mentioned, this is something that Putin may have a broader strategy regarding. And is this the U.S.'s opportunity to sort of push back against that broader aggressive strategy that Russia is putting forward?
Well, I think we have a multi-pronged, strategy with Russia. We saw just a week ago or so when the president had a very friendly conversation over the phone with President Putin, and there was some cooperation on counterterrorism. I think there is a little bit of, albeit constrained, opportunities for us to work together with the Russians on counter-narcotics and counter-proliferation and counter-terrorism, while at the same time serving our own national security interests. in this case in Ukraine. There could also be some opportunities on arms control discussions and maybe something limited on North Korea as well.
All right, Daniel.
It's a complex relationship, and I think we have to understand that it's nuanced. And those who made too much of the president's polite conversation with Vladimir Putin should now take a look at this very forceful assertion of our national security policy.
All right, Daniel Hoffman, thank you very much weighing in on this important topic. Developing story tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Западного направления во всем диапазоне высоких скоростей. По первому промах, по третьему уничтожить. Внимание, пуск по третьему, по четвертому.